countries have made to address carbon pollution with what scientists say is needed to prevent temperatures from rising 2 more degrees in line with goals set in 2009. If nothing changes, the UN notes carbon emission levels will keep increasing until 2050, by which time experts say it could be too late to do anything about the problem. At last check on Wall Street, Dow Jones Industrial Average was up 16 points at 17,704. NASDAQ was down 12 at 4690. S&P 500 down a fraction at 2,051. This is NPR News.
There's cars abandoned on the highway. People have heart attacks when they're shoveling this amount of snow. What are the dangers?
Well, we've had a number of things that we've had to worry about. We're not just feet off the ground. Normally that's not a problem, but if you've got 5 feet of snow up against it, it could be blocking your flue from working properly and carbon monoxide coming back into the homes. We did have some reports of that. And of course, we've also had some people lose power. So we've had people use generators, and we're advising them they must not use a generator indoors. If you use a generator indoors, you in all likelihood are risking death. So there's some significant things that can happen in a snowstorm. We're used to dealing with storms. Unfortunately, this storm was such that it's just delivering such a wallop.
Right. And back in 1977, people who were in Buffalo at that time remember another terrible blizzard. 24 people in the region died that time around. How does this one compare to that?
Well, I was alive back then. I was a young lad. I was 9 years old. I do remember it. It was a very, very here, but the conditions were worse for a prolonged period. So more people, unfortunately, died in their vehicles. The advantage we have today that we did not have in 1977 is people have cell phones, so if they do end up getting stuck, they can call our 911 system, and we can identify where they are. Back in 77, if someone got stuck, there was really no way to find out about that unless somebody stumbled upon the vehicle. So the advantages of modern technology have helped us, but during the worst part of the storm, it was very treacherous, and the only way to be able to traverse some of these roads was by foot. Even snowmobiles, because there was so much snow, couldn't get through because the snowmobiles were actually digging into the snow and basically being submerged.
Wow. Mark Poloncarz, Chief Executive of Erie County, New York. The area has just been dumped on. More than 5 feet of snow, more on the way. Mark, good luck to you.
Thanks, Peter.
And some incredible photos of that storm with the hashtag Snowvember on Twitter. Well, a new report out this week says 36 million people are living in modern-day slavery across the globe. The Australia-based group Walk Free released the second edition of its Global Slavery Index, which surveyed 167 countries and found that 60,000 slaves are living right here in the U.S., which, as we know, has its own painful history with slavery. A history that Edward Baptist says we don't often acknowledge as a major driver of the country's early economic growth. His new book is The Half Has Never Been Told, Slavery and the Making of American Capitalism. Edward Baptist is with us from Atlanta. Welcome.
It's great to be here, and thanks for having me.
And when you say the half has never been told, what you're talking about is an acknowledgement that without slavery, America's economy never would have grown into the global dominant economy that it is.
Yeah, I think that's one way to view the half. The other is to understand that a lot of that critique, that understanding of history was always there. It was always there, in particular in the memories of former slave people.
So why do you think that half has not been told?
Well, I think that by and large, the United States and more broadly Western societies have not wanted to hear that story over the last couple of centuries. We've lived through this period of increasing prosperity by and large, where we've had the fundamental transformation of our economy in a way that the world has never seen. Of course, there have been ups and downs, the Civil War, World War II, World War I, communism, etc. But over the course of that time, our world has been transformed by this sort of economic growth, and we don't want to hear this at its root. The economic growth depends to a large extent on slavery.
Well, make your case for us. Explain how important slavery was for the growth of the early American economy.
Well, both for the American economy and for the British economy, it's important to understand that the massive transformations that they go through in the 19th century, they shift from being primarily agricultural to primarily industrial in terms of how they make their wealth, how they generate their income. These processes happen first and foremost in cotton textile factories. And in order to have cotton textile factories, which are the first factories of the industrial system, and they change the way that people wear clothes all around the world, the way they buy clothes, the way that trade happens, the way that people work as they're now working in these factories and sitting in the fields. None of that is possible without having cheap cotton. And cheap cotton, above all, is delivered to those factories by enslaved people in the expanding American South. In fact, they can deliver cotton so cheaply and to such a massive extent that they essentially put all other cotton producers out of business by the 1830s.
And you write in the book, cotton became the dominant driver of U.S. economic growth. In 1802, cotton already accounted for 14% of the value of all U.S. exports, but by 1820, it accounted for 42%.
Yeah, that just continues to grow. In fact, from 1820 to 1860, over that long period of time, over half of all the money that's earned by U.S. products overseas comes from one single product, and that's cotton. Now, cotton plays a role that's kind of analogous in the world economy of the 19th century to what you see petroleum products playing in our world today.
And you look at some of the detail that you bring up in this book, and particularly you're talking about New Orleans as the pivot of economic expansion, and you describe New Orleans that looks very different from the New Orleans we see today, with just ship after ship after ship lined up there in New Orleans ready to take export of all of this cotton.
That's right. It's the leading cotton port in the world. And it's also, by some measures in the 1830s, the most important financial center in the United States. There's capital coming in, there's capital coming out. And eventually it'll lose that fight. And New York, of course, will become the financial center. But there's a moment where it looks like it can be. And there's one other thing that it's a crucial center for, and that's for the domestic slave trade. And that's the process of moving almost 1 million enslaved African Americans from the older states, where the chance for profits from field labor are not as good, but the chance for profits from selling people to domestic slave traders are very good. So they get moved from those old states and are transported to the new states, where cotton planters in particular are ready to pay extremely high amounts of money in order to buy typically 16 to 25-year-olds, men and women.
And we know from history that there were people in this country who thought that slavery was abhorrent and thought that it should go away. But it looks, from what you're writing, that all along the way, those who really had the power of the federal government decided to allow it to happen because they knew how important it was to the economy of the U.S.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think there's a sense among some American policymakers around the time of the Constitution that slavery is doomed as an institution. We have to bargain with slaveholders right now, who, after all, controlled a lot of the wealth of the country. But over time, as we can see, their profitability is decreasing. The planters of tobacco and rice and so on in particular are in hard times in the 1780s. As we see their profitability is decreasing, we can let slavery, in effect, die out on its own, especially if we close the slave trade from Africa. But because there was such a large population of enslaved people already, and because a new source of profit, the growing of cotton and the shipping of cotton to the new factory system, because that came up, it turned out that calculation was completely wrong, in fact.
We're talking with Edward Baptist, author of The Half Has Never Been Told, Slavery and the Making of American Capitalism. A provocative argument there, and you can weigh in at hereandnow.org. Would the U.S. economy be what it is now without slavery? Go to hereandnow.org.
Including auto, renters, boat, and motorcycle. More at geico.com or 1-800-947-AUTO. All Things Considered from NPR News is like a high-powered telescope. Every afternoon, we zoom in on what's important around the world. Then, through a clear lens, we apply the correct amount of magnification and focus on the facts to cast the stories of the day in just the proper light. All Things Considered from NPR News. Illuminate your world.
Make the connection. Wherever you are, stay with NPR.
a sort of uniform or standard predictable price. And then on the other hand, those close links to the banks in places like Mississippi and able to help buyers line up loans from local banks and so on and so forth. Credit is crucial to the process.
And you used the word efficient there. The other thing that was crucial to the process, you write, is these slave owners being just absolutely awful to the slaves to try to get them to produce more stuff and more quickly.
Yeah, when you look at the history of the Industrial Revolution and the factory system, one of the things that's remarkable and one of the things that is at the bottom of how it makes a difference in our lives is the fact that the shift to organized, rationalized, machine-based production over time means that for a given amount of labor, say a 12-hour workday by a worker, the product that comes out is greater. And this is absolutely crucial, continues to this day. But at the same time, we don't think that that kind of productivity increase is possible in hand labor. Or we sometimes don't think that. But it turns out that, in fact, in the production of cotton in the fields of the southern United States, enslaved people, year after year, produce cotton more and more efficiently. The average enslaved person picks 2% per day faster every single year from 1800 to 1860. And that means that by 1860, the average cotton picker is 4 times as efficient.
Tell us more about these tapes and how you got them and what's in them.
The tapes were part of a larger project, which is something that takes place mostly in the 1930s. This is going out and interviewing surviving ex-slaves. And most of these were done by the Works Progress Administration, part of the New Deal of Franklin Roosevelt. The New Deal was trying to put people to work. So they would take grad students whose programs had shut down, school teachers who'd been laid off, and things like that, send them out there to interview elderly Americans and get their life stories. What it amounts to is about 2,200 or so life histories of who survived enslavement.
And what did you learn from it?
Well, historians have been using these for a little while, but I think they've tended to either say, well, we believe every single thing they say, or we believe almost nothing of what they say, because many of the interviewees will say things that are contradictory. Like they'll say, well, my owner was very nice, but then they'll describe horrible things that happened on the next property over. And I think what you have to do is really engage with them as the products of people who, are very thoughtful about how they're telling their story, often to interviewers who they don't necessarily trust. Many of the interviewers are white. This was the 1930s South. You can see this in the difference between the interviewers that are white, the kinds of stories they elicit and the way those stories are structured, and the interviewers who are black, that tend to get a much more sort of straightforward catalog of horrors.
So, Ed Baptist, what do you want ordinary Americans to take away from this book? The case that you're making that the life that we live today, the economy that we live in today, is based on an economy that started on slavery, and we wouldn't be here today without it.
Yeah, when the United States achieves independence, it's fairly irrelevant on the world scene. Certainly, as a part of the global economy, it's pretty much small potatoes. By the time the Civil War starts in 1860, it's the second largest economy in the world, and it's the single biggest contributor to the success of the first economy economy in the world, which is Great Britain. Great Britain depends on its textile industry. And much of that growth, much of that transformation, much of that initial push, which we're still riding on today. We've done other things since then, but I like to think of those years as those initial years of accumulation in the retirement portfolio, which we know are so important if you want to build a big nest egg. So we know that much of that growth, much of that success comes from labor that was extracted from enslaved people, and even financial wealth that was based on enslaved people's bodies, which were traded and commodified. And we know that contribution was massively important. I think the first thing we need to do is to recognize that slavery isn't something that made a few people wealthy but not other people, or made a few people in the South wealthy but not people in the North, or something that doesn't continue to have effects, not just on race relations or something like that. It clearly does that too, but on wealth and on power today. Slavery continues to have an impact on America in the most basic economic sense as well.
Ed Baptist, author of The Half Has Never Been Told, Slavery and the Making of American Capitalism. Thank you so much for speaking with us.
Thanks for having me.
And we've got an excerpt of the book, and you can weigh in on what you think about this argument at hereandnow.org.
Funding for Here and Now comes from Brigham and Women's Hospital, where real-time multimodality imaging is being studied to improve precision in surgery. This operating room can be seen at brighamandwomens.org/precision. Brigham and Women's Hospital, life-giving breakthroughs. And Rhodes Scholar, with educational travel adventures to 150 countries, including Cuba. Learn more at roadscholar.org.
This is NPR FM Berlin, 1041 and online at nprberlin.de.
That can stretch these days from 6 to 7 years.
Also, the indie rock group TV on the Radio releases their first album since a band member's death.
The song starts out saying, we je t'aime, à demain, à la prochaine. I know it's best to say goodbye, but I can't seem to move away. And I think that pretty much encapsulates the spirit of the entire album.
Coming up, Here and Now.
I'm Steve Brown with this news update. NBC says it is scrapping plans to develop a new sitcom with comedian Bill Cosby. This is the second outlet within a day that has put off or abandoned a Cosby project amid sexual assault allegations. Actress and model Janice Dickinson became the third woman in recent weeks to allege she had been raped by Cosby. His lawyers have denied those allegations. President Obama will address the nation tomorrow night at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on executive actions he plans to take regarding immigration. The president is expected to take steps to protect as many as 5 million people who are living in the U.S. illegally from deportation. Republicans oppose any such actions, and some have threatened a government shutdown if the president acts on immigration during the lame duck session. The White House says it is not expecting government legislation to revamp federal child care aid. The president says the new law will give parents some peace of mind.
It's going to improve the quality of child care by requiring more training for caregivers and more enrichment for children. It's going to improve child safety by instituting background checks for staff.
President Obama says the law shows that Democrats and Republicans can unite to get things done. The acting director of the Secret Service is testifying in front of the House Judiciary Committee today. His first appearance on Capitol Hill since taking the post. Acting Director Joe Clancy vowed to do better. Clancy says that the list of what went wrong in the September White House fence jumping incident is devastating.
Although I firmly believe the Secret Service is better than this incident, I openly acknowledge that a failure of this magnitude, especially in light of other recent incidents, requires immediate action and longer-term reform.
An internal review of the Secret Service last week detailed a string of failures that allowed a Texas Army veteran to make his way into the East Room. Kurdish Peshmerga forces say they are launching a new offensive against the Islamic State group in Iraq. This comes as a suicide bomber killed at least 5 people in the Kurdish regional capital. The new Peshmerga offensive is targeting areas seized by the extremists in an August offensive that took over a third of Iraq. On Wall Street at last check, the Dow is up 6 points at 17,694. You're listening to Here and Now.
Funding for Here and Now comes from Lumosity, now with a 10-minute fit test to challenge memory, attention, and problem solving to calculate baseline scores. More at Lumosity.com. And Arizona State University, with more than 70 campus degrees, now available 100% online at online.asu.edu.
From NPR and WBUR, I'm Peter O'Dowd. It's Here and Now. If a new car is on your end-of-the-year shopping list, I'm sorry. Because Experian Automotive says Americans are taking longer to pay off their car loans. And Washington Post personal finance columnist Michelle Singletary says stretching out those payments could backfire. Michelle, welcome.
Thank you.
First, we're seeing more and more car loans spanning 6 to 7 years. That's a lot longer than the traditional 4-year loan. Why is that happening?
Cars are more expensive, and people want good cars, and so they can't afford the 4-year loan, so they're stretching it out to 5, 6, 7, and even 8 years.
Well, that seems like a good idea, I guess, because the monthly payments will get smaller the longer I have my loan, but it's not all good news, is it?
No, in fact, I tell people if you can't buy that car and with monthly payments that you can live with for 48 months, you cannot afford that car because a number of things will be at play. First of all, most importantly, you're going to pay more interest over that time. Oftentimes, the interest rate is higher because the lender is taking on more risk because you're going to have that loan used to, which is the 48-month loan.
So how much more interest will I be paying if I choose to pay off my loan in 6 or 7 years as opposed to 4?
You know, it depends on the interest rate and how much the car, but it could be, a couple $1,000s more.
Wow.
Depending on all those different factors. Yeah, I mean, and then also, you got insurance, higher insurance over that period of time. And there's so many things that could go wrong. Let's say you get into an accident. The longer you have a loan, the more likely you're going to be what's called upside down, meaning you owe more on the car than it's worth. So let's say you get in an accident and the insurance company, the car's totaled and the insurance company pays it off, but you still have a balance on that loan because they're only going to pay you the value of the car.
But what does that mean? So what happens if that happens to me?
So let's say you owe $10,000 on a loan, but the car's only worth $5,000. But you got to come up with $5,000 to sell the car to satisfy that loan. So you're stuck with that car. But what I found, and the people that I deal with, is that they will go ahead and trade in their car and tack on that difference that they owe to the new car.
Oh, no.
Yeah, and so now in the next car, they've got another long loan, 5 or 6 years, and they've got, money from this past loan. So from the very time they drive over the asphalt on the lot, they're already upside down.
All right, so walk me through the process. I'm at the car lot. I have this beautiful new car that I really, really want, but I've got to decide what to do and how to negotiate for that loan. What do you recommend?
I like to have people walk in with a loan offer from someone, a credit union, their own bank, or someone, so that they can compare it to whatever the dealer's offering. But most importantly, look, if you know you only can spend in your budget about $400 a month, don't think, I'll do $400 a month for 5 or 6 years. Just 48 months, and whatever car you can buy for that, that's what you buy. So it may not be the car you want, but it is the car that you can afford.
Tough lessons from Michelle Singletary. One other question. If I can afford a car just by paying cash, should I do that?
Cash is still king, baby. I have not used a loan for a car, and I don't know when. And one trick that I learned from my grandmother, Big Mama, when I did have a car loan, I would continue to make car payments to myself. So by the time I needed another car loan, now this is me, this is like 10 years later, I have the cash for a new or used car.
Great. Michelle Singletary writes the Color of Money column for the Washington Post with some advice about financing a new car. Michelle, thanks so much.
You're welcome.
And always listen to Big Mama's advice. You're listening to Here and Now.
Funding for Here and Now comes from MathWorks, creators of MATLAB and Simulink technical computing software. MathWorks, accelerating the pace of engineering and science. Learn more at mathworks.com.
NPR FM Berlin 1041 and online at nprberlin.de.
It's Here and Now. NBC has canceled a sitcom it had in development with comedian Bill Cosby. A similar announcement came from Netflix last night. The streaming service suspended a stand-up special with Cosby to mark his 77th birthday. That was scheduled for later this month.
And this comes after Dickinson came forward as the latest woman to accuse Bill Cosby of sexual assault. In an interview with Entertainment Tonight, she said Cosby assaulted her in 1982.
After dinner, in my room, he had given me wine and a pill, and the next morning I woke up and I wasn't wearing my pajamas, and I remember before I passed out that I had been sexually assaulted by this man.
Dickinson is just one of many women to raise sexual assault allegations against Cosby. They claim go back decades. Bill Carter is media correspondent for the New York Times. He's with us now. Bill, thanks for joining us, and tell us first what you make of this news that NBC is backing out of this project.
Well, I think it was pretty inevitable given the way things were moving. Obviously, they had a pilot where the plan was to have him be a patriarch of this family. And under these circumstances, they couldn't present that as, a very favorable, portrayal. So I think they, along with everybody else who's now been involved in this, is distancing themselves, as much as they can from Bill Cosby.
And Bill, we've seen this before. I mean, in a way, this is not really new in Hollywood. Just look at Woody Allen, Roman Polanski, also involved in these really difficult sexual allegations. Polanski also convicted in absentia. So is this case with Cosby any different than those?
Well, you know, what seems to be there's several elements that make it different. One is the number of women who have come forward, which is an extraordinary number. 15 women in total, I think you would say, have been associated with these charges, and 5 have gone on the record. Names on the record. That's pretty extensive. But you also have Bill's image, because, I mean, this is a guy who was, you know, basically America's father for, you know, in the 1980s. He was the image of fatherhood and, you know, presented himself as a family man and sold products and wrote books for children and, you know, so that all casts it in an even more severe light, I think.
But there's not been a trial or anything like that, and his lawyers continue to say that he didn't do anything wrong.
Well, the interesting thing, they came out and said that there was a blanket denial of all these charges, and then the next day they came out and said, well, we don't include the woman that he made a settlement with in that blanket denial, because obviously they had made some deal, an arrangement with her, so. You know, and because they say that these charges have been discredited, that doesn't mean, based on what? What discredited them? I don't really know there was any evidence that wasn't true. Now, I think, very interestingly, they went right after Janice Dickerson, though. A new lawyer came out today and basically said her charges were complete fabrication. That was an interesting difference between that and the other charges, which they just vaguely denied. This one, they specifically mentioned her, and they said it was an outrageous lie.
But whatever it turns out to be true, you're saying NBC, Netflix, they've got to just back away. He's too toxic.
It's a toxic, completely toxic atmosphere right now around Bill Cosby. You can't present him as, you know, even a guest on David Letterman. You know, he was supposed to be on David Letterman tonight. And that had to be canceled because Dave would have to ask him the questions about this. He can't answer these questions. He's saying he's not going to answer the questions. After all, he was on NPR.
Yeah, Scott Simon just the other day.
Yes.
Cosby, 77 years old. So, you know, what happens next for him? I wonder if he can recover from this.
Well, you know, I mean, you never say never in entertainment, but it's a very difficult situation for him because I think he couldn't get out of this without addressing it. One of the interesting things about the latest Woody Allen thing was, you know, he wasn't talking about it. And then he wrote an op-ed in the New York Times, and he basically came out and thoroughly denied the charges. Now, then it became a he said, she said thing, but he did make a statement. And you don't see Cosby doing that. You see him instead circling the wagons and saying he'll have no further comment. So I don't know where he goes from here. I mean, you know, he's really been only doing stand-up and stuff. The NBC project was, you know, maybe a real comeback attempt for him to do television. But I think this, you know, it was inevitable this was going to fail. I mean, I don't even think they had a lot of hopes that they could do the show. It was a great idea, but he's an older guy now. Could he still do the show? I don't know. And they didn't even have a script, so it was very, very early in development. It really wasn't far down the road.
We're talking with Bill Carter of the New York Times on the news today that NBC has pulled the plug on this Bill Cosby project. Netflix did the same thing with its project just last night. It made that announcement. Bill Carter, how does this compare to situations of other people who've been deemed toxic? And I'm thinking of people like Martha Stewart when she got involved in all these insider trading allegations, or Lance Armstrong when he admitted to doping.
Yeah, well, Lance Armstrong certainly, you know, is not going to be taken credibly as a bicyclist anymore, I would say. Martha Stewart is a little different because I think insider trading did not mean she was therefore doing something, you know, nefarious with cooking or something. So it didn't impinge on her role. This is very much a part of his image, very much a part of how he has performed and presented himself throughout his entire career. So it's very much more difficult for him to come out from under this, as I see it. I mean, unless he could find a way to really blow up these charges with all these women who are supposedly, all these women made this up, it seems to me he's really got very little opportunity to say, you know, even in 3 years, well, that was, you know, remember that incident? Because it was never addressed. I mean, you know, these are very old charges, I have to say. They're 2 decades old. But, you know, they're consistent. They're the same story again and again and again with a lot of different women, and that tends to give it credibility.
Yeah, and you said it. Bill Cosby, America's dad. Many of us grew up with him, watched him for years on television. What are we hearing from his fans today?
Well, you know, most of his fans are in shock. People who really his show and loved him. What I hear from them is real shock. They can't believe this. there's a very odd thing that's going on between conservatives and liberals in this thing. Cosby all of a sudden became something of a darling of some conservatives because he was speaking out against some black culture that they felt was, bad for families and things like that. And he got support from like Rush Limbaugh over that. So he's been getting some weird support in the conservative community. But I have not really seen much else that's come forward. And I think most of the people who really have followed him, his career, and admired him as a comedian first, have sort of backed off big time now.
Bill Carter, a media correspondent with the New York Times, talking with us about the news today that Bill Cosby's upcoming project with NBC has been shelved. Same with Netflix. Bill Carter, thanks for joining us.
Nice to meet you guys.
This is Here Now.
Funding for Here and Now comes from MathWorks, creators of MATLAB and Simulate technical computing software. MathWorks, accelerating the pace of engineering and science. Learn more at mathworks.com.
NPR Music has a website with jazz interviews and performances from around the country and throughout the years. Check it out at nprmusic.org and click on Jazz in the upper right corner.
The connection. Wherever you are, stay with NPR.
Well, we took a week off, but we are back now with another edition of the Here and Now DJ Sessions.
There goes the last DJ.
Ann Litt, DJ with KCRW in Santa Monica, California, is back with us again. Hi, Ann.
Hi, Jeremy. It's good to be here.
It's great to have you, and let's get right to the music. You wanted us to hear from the Irish singer-songwriter Damien Rice, who is out with his first solo album in 8 years. Here he is with I Don't Want to Change You.
Wherever you are, know that I adore you. No matter how far, well, I can go before you. If ever you need someone, well, not that you need help there.
Okay, first of all, I like that sound a lot. And second of all, I want to just say, for people who may remember, Damien Rice had a very successful album in 2002. His next album did not go over as well. He told the LA Times, I basically crashed and burned at the end of the last tour. Now he's back. What do you think of it?
Well, I think it's beautiful. I think it's sweet and satisfying. And I think the thing I love about this song in particular is that the words are absolutely beautifully simple, but the emotion and the Damien Rice's debut album, and he's back with that, self-effacing as always, but with that inner core of just heart and passion.
Wherever you go, well, I can always follow. My feet is real slow. If it's a lot to swallow.
And a really nice, smooth sound there as well.
Beautiful. The orchestration is lovely. It doesn't overpower what he's doing, the poetry he's bringing with the lyrics. It just complements it so sweetly.
All right, well, now to the Brooklyn indie rock group Petey on the Radio. They're releasing their 5th album This week, you wanted us to hear something from Matt. Here is Careful You. Great, but very different sound there, and I understand this is the first album that they have made since the death of one of their members, bassist Gerard Smith, who died of lung cancer in 2011. What do you hear in this album?
Well, I think what I hear is emotion, similar to Danny and Rice, but it presented in a completely different way. This is raw. They came to Los Angeles. In fact, a couple of the members of the band now live in Los Angeles. They recorded it here. And the thing about TV on the radio and the way their albums emerge is that they go their separate ways after a project, and you never know when you'll hear from them again. So every TV on the radio album to me is a gift. And this album in particular, and referencing the death of their close band member, I just feel raw emotion, especially in this song.
You know, I recognized this song as soon as I heard it, and I don't know whether that's because I just listened to the KCRW music I do very frequently.
Well, I have to say, it's again a favorite among all of our DJs, and I do think it strikes the chord. The song starts out saying, we should come à demain à la prochaine. I know it's best to say goodbye.